in a dilapidated fifth-floor walk-up in the South Bronx, where the radiator clanked like a drowning man gasping for air. James Carpenter sat in his frayed armchair. The February wind whistled through poorly sealed windows as he stared at the small TV screen. Its colors faded after years of use. "And the Oscar goes to Denzel Washington," announced the presenter. James's weathered hands trembled as he reached for the remote, increasing the volume. His eyes, once sharp and penetrating when evaluating his students' performances, now clouded with cataracts, never left the screen. Denzel's familiar figure approached the podium, commanding the stage with the very presence James had helped him cultivate 4 decades earlier. "Thank you, thank you." Denzel's voice filled the tiny apartment. "This journey began long ago." James mouthed the words along with him, having watched this acceptance speech countless times. He knew every pause, every inflection, every gesture, not out of obsession, but recognition. Recognition of techniques they had practiced together in a cramped community theater in Washington, D.C. When Denzel was just a directionless young man with raw talent and uncertainty in his eyes. As the speech ended, James switched off the TV and glanced around his apartment. The walls were adorned not with accolades or awards, but with water stains that had gradually formed patterns resembling continents on a forgotten map. His bookshelf, one of the few pieces of furniture he'd managed to keep, sagged under the weight of dog-eared acting theory books and weathered scripts. On the small table beside him lay an eviction notice, its red lettering harsh against the white paper. Final notice: 30 days to vacate. James folded his glasses carefully and placed them atop a worn leather notebook. This notebook, with its peeling cover and pages yellow with age, contained 4 decades worth of observations, techniques, and notes about every promising student he'd ever taught, including the day he first met Denzel. "Mr. Carpenter?" The voice was followed by a gentle knock at the door. "Come in, Mrs. Reyes," James called out, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of age and decades of projecting from the back of theaters. His neighbor, Elena Reyes, entered with a container of soup. At 62, she was the youngest resident in their building, working 2 jobs, yet still finding time to check on him. "You didn't come down for the community dinner," she said, setting the container on his cluttered kitchenette counter. "Pastor Williams asked about you." "Just tired today," James replied, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wouldn't burden her with knowledge of the eviction notice, or that his medication costs had doubled last month. "Thank you for the soup." Elena's eyes lingered on the eviction notice, but she said nothing. They both knew the reality of their neighborhood. Rising rents pushing out long-time residents. She simply nodded and squeezed his shoulder before leaving. Alone again, James reached for his notebook. He flipped to a page marked DW First Session and ran his finger over his own handwriting from 1979. "Young man carries tension in his shoulders, hides behind charm. When pushed past comfort, something raw emerges, something honest. Not technically trained, but instinctively understands emotional truth. Must learn to trust his instincts. Potential, limitless." James smiled faintly. He had been right about Denzel. He'd been right about many of his students who now had careers in theater, television, and film. Not all became stars, but many made living wages doing what they loved. He closed the notebook and looked toward the window. Outside, the Bronx continued its evening rhythm. Distant sirens, thumping music, occasional shouts. This had been his home for 15 years, since the theater where he taught closed. since his savings had gradually dwindled since his diagnosis. Multiple sclerosis. The words had come as a shock 7 years ago. The deterioration had been slow but relentless, beginning with tremors in his hands, progressing to difficulty walking. The medical bills had devoured his modest savings, and now, at 78, he subsisted on $740 monthly from Social Security. James rose slowly, supporting himself on his cane, and moved to the window. Below, children played basketball using a milk crate nailed to a telephone pole. He watched their movements, their natural expressions of frustration, joy, disappointment. All authentic emotions he once helped actors recreate. The best acting isn't acting at all, he whispered to himself, recalling words he'd spoken to countless students. He turned away from the window and shuffled to the small bathroom. The mirror revealed a man he sometimes barely recognized. Thinning white hair, deep lines etched into dark skin. Eyes that had seen both triumph and failure. 30 days, he said to his reflection. 30 days to find a new home with $740 a month in one of the most expensive cities in America. 30 days before he would likely join the growing ranks of elderly homeless. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, a strange calm settled over him. He had lived through the civil rights movement, through Vietnam, through the AIDS crisis that took many of his friends and students, through personal failures and small victories. The scene isn't over until the lights go down, he told his reflection, quoting another of his teaching mantras. And these lights are still very much on. He returned to his chair and picked up his notebook again. If these were to be his final days in this apartment, he would spend them recording the last of his teaching methods, his observations about the craft he had devoted his life to. What he didn't know, as he began to write in his careful script, was that tomorrow would bring an unexpected visitor with a camera and a question. A visitor who would inadvertently change everything. "Excuse me, is this the residence of James Carpenter?" The voice came from a young woman standing in James's doorway the following afternoon. She was in her early 30s, with dark-rimmed glasses and a camera bag slung over her shoulder. Her expression was a mixture of professional determination and barely concealed excitement. James squinted at her. Unexpected visitors were rare. "Yes, I'm James Carpenter. And you are?" Mia Chun, independent documentarian. She extended her hand. "I'm working on a series about influential figures in American theater education. Your name keeps coming up in my research." James's eyebrows raised slightly. It had been years since anyone had recognized his contributions to theater education. He gestured her inside with a skeptical wave. "Not much to see here, I'm afraid," he said, suddenly self-conscious about the apartment's disrepair. Mia scanned the small space, her filmmaker's eye taking in details. The stacks of weathered scripts, the single-burner hot plate, the carefully organized medication bottles, the folded walker in the corner. But it was the notebook on the side table that seemed to draw her attention most. "May I sit?" she asked, indicating the only other chair in the room. James nodded, lowering himself carefully into his armchair. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy," Mia admitted, placing her camera bag on the floor. "I interviewed Professor Thomas Whitman at Juilliard last month. When I asked about unconventional but impactful acting teachers, he mentioned you immediately. Said you had a way of breaking through to students when no one else could." James smiled faintly. "Tom exaggerates. We taught together for a summer workshop in '86. He's not the only one who mentioned you," Mia continued. "I spoke with Marcus Johnson from the Berkeley Repertory Theater, and he called you, and I quote, the secret weapon behind at least a dozen major acting careers." A silence fell between them as James absorbed this information. These were colleagues from another lifetime. People he'd assumed had forgotten him entirely. "Why now?" he finally asked. "Why this interest in an old man long past his teaching days?" Mia leaned forward, her earnestness palpable. "Because we're losing the oral history of American theater education. The techniques, the philosophies that shape generations of performers. Everyone knows the big names, Strasberg, Adler, Meisner. But there were others, like you, who developed unique approaches that deserve documentation." James's gaze drifted to his notebook. "And what makes you think I have anything worth documenting?" "Denzel Washington," Mia said simply. "And David Morse. And Viola Davis. And at least 16 other working actors who've mentioned your name in interviews over the years." She reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet, quickly navigating to a saved web page. "Here, from Denzel's interview with Inside the Actors Studio back in 2002. She held up the screen, showing a transcript. "James Lipton. Was there a teacher who particularly influenced you?" "Denzel Washington, several. But there was this man, James Carpenter, who ran this little theater in D.C. when I was just starting out. He didn't teach the method or any specific technique. He taught you how to find your own truth. He'd say, 'I can't teach you how to act. I can only help you remove what's blocking your natural ability to tell the truth under imaginary circumstances.' That stayed with me." James felt a tightness in his chest reading these words. He remembered that particular phrase. It had been central to his teaching philosophy. "One interview from over 20 years ago hardly justifies a documentary," he said, trying to maintain his composure. "There's more," Mia persisted, scrolling through her tablet. "Many more references. But what convinced me was finding this." She showed him a grainy photograph from 1979. A group of young actors on a small stage. In the background, a younger James stood watching, his focus intense. "That's from the Washington Star's archives," she explained. "A review of your production of A Raisin in the Sun at the Community Arts Workshop. The critic called it transcendent, and specifically credited your direction for extracting performances of rare authenticity from a cast of unknowns." James took the tablet with trembling hands, staring at his younger self. The man in the photo stood straight and confident, no cane, no tremor, eyes bright with purpose. Beside him, barely recognizable but unmistakable to James, stood a young Denzel Washington in his first significant role. "May I record our conversation?" Mia asked gently, pulling out her camera. "Just audio for now. I'd like to hear about your approach, your journey." James handed back the tablet. "I don't see the point. That man," he gestured to his younger self in the photo, "he's gone." "Is he?" Mia challenged, glancing meaningfully at the notebook. "Because Professor Whitman told me you kept meticulous notes on every student, every technique. He said your notebook was legendary." James's hand moved protectively toward the weathered journal. "These are just personal observations. They're your legacy," Mia countered. "A teaching method that deserves preservation." The radiator clanked loudly, filling the silence that followed. Finally, James sighed. "1 hour, he conceded. "Though I can't imagine who would be interested." Mia smiled as she set up her equipment. "Let's find out together." What began as reluctant responses gradually transformed as James began speaking about his craft. The tremor in his hands seemed to subside as he described his philosophy of acting. How he believed that great performances came not from imposing technique, but from removing obstacles to emotional truth. "Acting isn't about pretending," he explained, his voice growing stronger. "It's about accessing genuine human experience under fictional circumstances. The actor's job isn't to create emotion, but to create conditions where emotion emerges naturally." As he spoke, he occasionally referenced his notebook, reading from passages written decades apart. Mia remained almost completely silent, asking minimal questions, recognizing that she was witnessing something precious. A master teacher finding his voice again. After nearly 2 hours, far longer than the agreed-upon hour, Mia finally turned off her recorder. That was... She paused, searching for the right word. Illuminating. James looked surprised, as if coming out of a trance. "I talked too much." "You didn't," Mia assured him. "Not nearly enough, actually. Would you be willing to continue tomorrow? Perhaps with video this time?" Before James could answer, his phone rang, an old landline he kept for emergencies. He excused himself and answered. "Mr. Carpenter, this is Grace from Dr. Patterson's office. I'm calling about your latest test results. The doctor would like you to come in as soon as possible." James's expression remained neutral as he confirmed an appointment for the following morning, but his hand tightened around the receiver. After hanging up, he turned to find Mia watching him with concern. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Just a routine follow-up," he lied smoothly, drawing on decades of teaching actors how to deliver convincing performances. "About tomorrow, I'm not sure." Mia gathered her equipment, sensing his need for privacy. "Here's my card. Call me if you change your mind." She hesitated at the door. "Mr. Carpenter? Thank you for today. What you shared, it matters." After she left, James sat motionless in his chair, staring at the eviction notice still on his table. The doctor's call likely meant his condition was progressing faster than expected. The timing was grimly perfect. Lose his health and his home in the same month. He picked up his notebook and opened to a blank page. At the top, he wrote final lessons and began to write, his handwriting unsteady but determined. What he didn't realize was that Mia, passionate about her discovery, had already uploaded a short audio clip from their conversation to her documentary project's social media page. Within hours, it would begin circulating among theater communities online, accompanied by the startling revelation that the influential acting coach mentioned by several prominent actors was now living in poverty in the Bronx. By morning, as James made his way to the doctor's office to hear what he suspected would be grim news, the first ripples of a story were already spreading. A story that would soon become a wave. 3 days after Mia's visit, James returned to his apartment from the pharmacy, clutching a bag with medications he could barely afford. His doctor had confirmed his fears. His condition was deteriorating faster than expected. As he struggled up the stairs, his phone rang continuously. Mrs. Reyes met him in the hallway, eyes wide. "James, people have been calling the building's office for you. Some reporter from the New York Times came by. And this," she handed him a tablet showing Mia's documentary clip, which had gone viral overnight. The video had over 2 million views, with thousands of comments expressing outrage that the mentor to Hollywood stars was facing eviction and health issues without support. His phone continued ringing. Former students, reporters, even a representative from Denzel Washington's foundation. But it was the email on Mrs. Reyes's tablet that changed everything. A high school drama teacher had shown his students James's video, and they'd written to thank him for his wisdom. That evening, with a borrowed smartphone propped against his medication bottles, James recorded his first intentional lesson in 15 years. "The true artist creates regardless of circumstance," he began, his voice finding its old strength despite the tremor in his hands. "Today, we'll discuss how limitation breeds creativity. What happened next defied all expectations. Rather than accepting charity from his famous former students, though he graciously acknowledged their offers, James launched Acting from the Edge. Online masterclasses taught from his tiny apartment. Film students from NYU volunteered to improve the production quality. But viewers connected most with the raw authenticity of his teaching. 6 months later, James sat in a modest but accessible one-bedroom apartment in the same neighborhood, paid for by his now profitable online classes. On his wall hung a framed note from Denzel. You taught me to find truth in fiction. Now you're teaching thousands. The student never surpassed the master. As he prepared for his weekly live stream, followed now by acting students from around the world, James opened his notebook to a fresh page. The diagnosis hadn't changed, the challenges remained, but something fundamental had shifted. Today, he said, looking directly into the camera with clear, purposeful eyes, we'll discuss how to transform personal tragedy into universal truth. The final and perhaps most important lesson any artist can learn. The red light blinked on the camera, and James Carpenter, no longer forgotten, began his most important role, being himself.